the DNA test that revealed my master's forbidden bloodline. I always thought my family's story was a straightforward one. A clear, unbroken line stretching back through generations of resilient people who had survived the unimaginable horrors of slavery, built new lives from the ashes of oppression, and somehow, against all odds, thrived. We were the inheritors of strength, of perseverance, of a quiet dignity forged in fire. And I, like so many others, took a DNA test expecting to simply fill in a few missing branches on that already well-understood family tree. Maybe I'd find some distant cousins in a place we hadn't known about, or perhaps a more precise origin point in Africa. What I found instead was a name that had been intentionally buried, a secret so profound and painful that generations of my ancestors had carried it in silence. A name that connected me directly and undeniably to the very man who had owned my ancestors. This isn't just a story about genetics, it's the story of how a simple cheek swab ripped open a centuries-old wound and revealed my master's forbidden bloodline. And let me tell you, it changed everything. Growing up, my grandmother was the keeper of our family's oral history. She was a woman carved from granite and honey, her eyes holding stories that her lips often couldn't quite articulate. She'd sit me on her knee, her voice a soft hum, and tell me tales of our people with these huge, gaping holes in them. "We come from strong people who made it through, baby," she'd say, her gaze distant, fixed on some memory I couldn't see. But when I'd press her for specifics about names, about places, about the how of it all, she'd just shake her head, a shadow crossing her face. "Some things are better left in the past, child. Some things are too heavy to carry." I used to think she was just being mysterious, like she had some dramatic family secret that in reality wasn't all that dramatic. Every family has a few skeletons in the closet, right? I figured it was something mundane, perhaps a scandalous cousin or a runaway ancestor. But now I understand that she wasn't being mysterious at all. She was carrying something far too heavy to put into words, a truth that she believed would break us if it ever saw the light of day. It was a burden passed down through generations, a silent agreement to protect the living from the brutal realities of the dead. For years, that curiosity simmered beneath the surface. I'd dabble in genealogy, poring over census records and Freedmen's Bureau documents, trying to piece together the fragments she left behind. But the walls were always there, thick and unyielding. The records for enslaved people are notoriously sparse, often listing them as chattel rather than individuals with names and families. It felt like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half deliberately obscured. Then last year I decided to take a DNA test. Honestly, it was born out of a mix of genuine curiosity and a bit of FOMO, if I'm being completely honest. My cousin had done one, and she'd uncovered this whole new branch of our family in Brazil, people we never knew existed. It was exhilarating, tangible connection to a wider world. I thought, hey, maybe I'll find something interesting too. Maybe I'd trace our family back to a specific tribe in West Africa, finally putting a name to the ancestral homeland my grandmother could only vaguely hint at. Or perhaps I'd discover some unexpected European ancestry, a common enough occurrence given the history of this country. I ordered the kit, did the whole cheek swab thing, sealed it up, sent it off, and promptly forgot about it for what felt like an eternity. About 6 weeks, actually. Life went on. The mystery of my grandmother's silences remained, tucked away in the back of my mind. When the email finally arrived, its subject line stark and unassuming, "Your DNA results are ready." I was sitting in my car after a particularly grueling day at work. The evening sun was slanting through the windshield, painting the dashboard in hues of orange and gold. I remember thinking, okay, let's see what kind of African I am. It sounds almost glib now, but that was genuinely the extent of my expectation. I opened the app, my thumb poised to scroll, expecting to see the usual breakdown, a healthy percentage from West Africa, maybe some Central or Southern African regions, and, because, well, history, probably a small, unsurprising sliver of European ancestry. But what I saw made me drop my phone onto the passenger seat with a clatter. It wasn't the percentages that caught my eye first. It was a name, a very specific, very familiar name. There, among my closest DNA matches, was a name I recognized instantly, a name that had haunted my genealogical research for years. A white family, the Whitmores. My stomach lurched. I'd studied their plantation records years ago when I first got serious about tracing my family's roots. Their names, their dates, their land holdings, all meticulously documented in dusty archives. The match was close, too close. We're talking about a genetic relationship that, by all logical and historical accounts, simply shouldn't exist. Not for me, not for us, not unless the unthinkable had happened. Unless the master hadn't just owned my ancestors, hadn't just brutalized them, hadn't just profited from their forced labor, unless he had created them. I sat in that car, engine off, the world outside fading into a blur, for what felt like an eternity. Probably an hour, maybe more. My phone lay on the seat, its screen still glowing with the damning evidence. The name was Thomas Whitmore, the same Thomas Whitmore who owned a sprawling plantation in Virginia, the same man who, according to the 1850 slave schedules, held 127 enslaved people as property, 127 souls listed like livestock, without names, without dignity, without humanity. I'd seen his name repeatedly in those disgusting census records, those cold, bureaucratic documents where human beings were reduced to numbers and ages. I'd seen him referred to as Master Tom in the WPA slave narratives, those poignant, often heartbreaking oral histories collected from formerly enslaved people in the 1930s. And now, according to the irrefutable science of my DNA, Thomas Whitmore wasn't just a historical figure, a name in an archive, a ghost from a brutal past. He was my fourth great-grandfather, my ancestor. The man who owned my ancestors was also the man who fathered them. The implications of that single, stark revelation were like a physical blow. The thing about DNA tests, you see, is they don't lie. They don't care about your carefully constructed family stories, the comfortable narratives you've built, or the things your ancestors, for very good reasons, tried so desperately to hide. They just show you the biological truth, and sometimes that truth is so raw, so ugly, so profoundly unsettling, you can barely bring yourself to look at it, let alone accept it. I share 3.2% of my DNA with a direct descendant of Thomas Whitmore. That percentage, according to geneticists, means we're second cousins. Let that sink in for a moment. Second cousins. The man who held my family in bondage, who could sell them away from each other on a whim, who controlled every aspect of their lives, their bodies, their very existence, also fathered children with them, my ancestors, my blood. It was a truth that felt like a betrayal, a violation echoing across generations. It twisted everything I thought I knew about my lineage, about myself. I drove home in a daze, the world feeling strangely off-kilter. That night I called my mother. Her voice, usually so vibrant and full of life, became quiet when I told her. Not the kind of quiet where someone is merely shocked or surprised by new information. No, this was the kind of quiet that speaks volumes. The heavy, knowing silence of someone who already suspects, who has carried the unspoken for too long. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "did you know about this? About the Whitmores?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. So long that I actually pulled the phone away from my ear, checking to see if the call had dropped. Then her voice, soft and strained, finally broke the silence. "Your grandmother told me once," she confessed, the words heavy with the weight of generations. "But we weren't supposed to talk about it. She said it would kill your grandfather to know we had that man's blood in us." That conversation, fraught with unspoken grief and inherited trauma, was like a seismic shift in our family. It didn't just reveal a secret, it opened up a floodgate, a hidden chamber of our history that had been sealed shut for over a century. My mother, once hesitant, now spoke with a newfound urgency, as if the dam had finally broken. She told me that her grandmother, born in 1898, had whispered stories about the white Whitmore babies who were born to enslaved women on the plantation. Not just rumors, but concrete, whispered histories passed from mother to daughter. She described how some of those children, light enough to pass for white, were sent up north, disappearing into a new identity, severing ties with their past to forge a safer future. Others, she said, remained on the plantation, unable or unwilling to leave, working alongside their siblings who were still enslaved, their mixed heritage a visible, constant reminder of their brutal origins. The women in our family, my mother explained, had passed down this knowledge like a poisoned inheritance, a bitter truth that was too dangerous to speak aloud, too painful to acknowledge openly, yet too vital to ever truly forget. It was a burden they carried, a silent testament to survival, and a silent protest against the violence that created them. This wasn't just a secret, it was a survival mechanism, a way to navigate a world that was designed to deny their very humanity. Armed with this newfound, devastating truth, I started researching obsessively. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a desperate need to understand, to contextualize, to give voice to the silenced. I ordered every record I could find about the Whitmore plantation: land deeds, probate records, tax lists, church records. I delved into local histories, old newspapers, anything that might shed more light on this family that was now undeniably my family. What I found was a chilling portrait of systemic hypocrisy. Thomas Whitmore, according to local papers and historical accounts, was considered a benevolent slave owner. Benevolent. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. In the twisted lexicon of the antebellum South, benevolent often meant he didn't separate families unless he needed money. He was lauded in the local papers as being kind to his people, a man of good standing in the community. Kind. While he was systematically raping the women he owned, women who had no power, no recourse, no agency, their bodies considered mere extensions of his property. It was a brutality wrapped in the veneer of civility, a monstrous lie upheld by an entire society. The records also showed he had a wife, a legitimate family, and 7 children with her, a perfect, respectable Southern patriarch. But then there was the 1860 slave schedule, and there it was, stark and undeniable, 17 enslaved children under the age of 10 listed on his plantation. 17. That's not a coincidence, or that's not a random occurrence. That's a pattern, a horrific, undeniable pattern of exploitation and abuse. And my DNA, the incontrovertible proof flowing through my veins, says that at least one of those children, possibly many more, was my direct ancestor. My existence, my very being, is a testament to that pattern. Then I found a will from 1863, Thomas Whitmore's will. In it, he bequeathed my faithful servant Charlotte and her 3 children to his wife, Charlotte. I stared at that name for a long, long time. The simplicity of it, the quiet dignity of it, juxtaposed against the dehumanizing phrase, my faithful servant. Was she the one? Was she my 4th great-grandmother, the woman who endured this unspeakable violation? The woman who had to watch her children, possibly fathered by her owner, be inherited like furniture, like tools, like livestock, alongside the rest of his property? The depth of her pain, her resilience, her forced compliance, it was almost too much to bear. Her name, written in a will, was a silent scream across the centuries, a testament to a life lived under unimaginable duress. I imagined her, her heart a battlefield, her spirit a fortress, trying to protect her children in a world that saw them as commodities. But the thing that truly broke me, that brought me to my knees, was finding a photograph, a tangible, visual link to this brutal past. After the Civil War, in the complex, often contradictory aftermath of emancipation, some of the Whitmores, the white Whitmores, actually stayed in touch with their formerly enslaved relatives, the ones who were family. I found a photo from 1910, faded and sepia-toned, a family reunion of sorts. In the back row, standing a little apart, yet undeniably present, there's a woman who looks so strikingly like my grandmother it took my breath away. The same high cheekbones, the same piercing, intelligent eyes, the same quiet strength etched into her features. The caption, scrawled in elegant cursive on the back, simply read, Charlotte's daughter, age 60, that's my great-great-grandmother, my direct ancestor, standing in a photograph with white people who were her cousins, her half-siblings, the children of the man who owned her, the man who owned her mother. And everyone in that photo is smiling, a forced smile, a hopeful smile, a smile of defiance. I'll never know. But the image itself was a stark, unsettling tableau of a family fractured by race, power, and an unspeakable secret, yet still, somehow, connected. It was a visual representation of the poisoned inheritance my mother had spoken of. A silent scream captured in time. The next step felt both terrifying and inevitable. I reached out to my DNA match, the descendant of Thomas Whitmore, whose genetic profile had first alerted me to this horrific connection. Her name is Sarah, and she lives in Connecticut. My message was carefully worded, cautious, hinting at a shared ancestor, but not immediately dropping the bombshell. She responded with an email full of enthusiasm, genuinely excited to find a new cousin, eager to compare notes on family history. My heart pounded as I typed out the truth. When I explained who I was, whose descendant I was, the silence on her end of the digital connection was palpable. It stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, mirroring the silence my mother had given me. Then her reply came, stark and simple. "I think we need to talk." We talked for 3 hours that night. Sarah, it turned out, was a remarkable woman. She wasn't defensive, not in the way I had braced myself for. Instead, she was thoughtful, somber, and surprisingly candid. She told me that her family, the White Whitmores, had always known about the Black Whitmores. It wasn't a spoken truth at every family dinner, but it was an open secret, a pervasive undercurrent that nobody talked about at reunions, yet everyone understood. It was the elephant in every room, a quiet hum beneath the surface of their respectable family history. She recounted how her grandfather had told her that his own great-grandfather, Thomas's legitimate son, had actually paid for some of the mixed-race children to go to college up north after emancipation. "He said it was the least he could do," Sarah told me, her voice tinged with a complex mix of shame and a strange kind of pride. "But he never acknowledged them as family while they were alive. Not openly, anyway." It was an act of belated, inadequate atonement, a gesture born perhaps of guilt, or perhaps of a fragile sense of duty, but never of true familial love or recognition. Sarah shared things with me that I could never have found in any archive. She sent me photographs I'd never seen before, more family reunions where my ancestors were standing in the back, separate but present, a silent acknowledgement of their shared, yet unequal, lineage. She told me about the family Bible, a heavy leather-bound tome that held both the legitimate and illegitimate children recorded within its pages, but in different handwritings, a stark visual representation of the racial divide that permeated even their most sacred records. The names of the white children were written in elegant script, their births and marriages meticulously noted. The names of the black children, however, were often scrawled in a hurried hand, sometimes just initials. A footnote to the main narrative. She even recounted a heartbreaking story about how her great-aunt, in the 1920s, had tried to give some land to the Black Whitmores, a small act of restitution, but how the white side of the family had vehemently stopped it, fearing it would dilute their inheritance and, perhaps more importantly, publicly acknowledge the forbidden bloodline. It was a stark reminder that even generations later, the legacy of racial division and the desire to maintain white supremacy continued to dictate actions and suppress truth. This revelation, this explosive truth, has changed everything about how I see my family. I used to think we were just survivors, just people who made it through that, embodying strength in the face of adversity, and we are. But we are also the direct product of one of the most brutal, dehumanizing aspects of American slavery, the systematic rape of enslaved women by their owners. Thomas Whitmore didn't just own my ancestors, he created them. He quite literally made my family exist through an act of violence, power, and unspeakable coercion. My very existence, my genetic makeup, is a testament to that horrifying legacy. It's a bitter pill to swallow, a profound reorientation of my understanding of self and lineage. And the thing is, this isn't unusual. Well, not by a long shot. Since my results came back, since I started talking about this, I've connected with dozens, hundreds even, of other black people who have discovered the exact same thing through their DNA tests. We're all finding these undeniable genetic connections to the very families that owned ours, to the very men who brutalized our female ancestors. It's like we're all part of this terrible, secret club that nobody ever wanted to join, a club bound by shared trauma and a collective painful truth. We find each other on genetic genealogy forums, in hushed online groups sharing stories that echo mine, each one a testament to the pervasive, insidious nature of plantation slavery. It's a testament to the fact that American history, particularly the history of slavery, is not just some distant, abstract concept. It is alive. It is in our blood. It is in our families. My grandmother's silence makes sense now. How do you tell your children, your grandchildren, that their very existence is tied to the worst kind of violence, to the deepest violation of human dignity? How do you explain that your light skin, your green eyes, your good hair, traits that might have been admired or seen as markers of beauty, aren't just random genetics, but tangible, undeniable evidence of your family's trauma? She carried that knowledge, that crushing burden, for 90 years, a lifetime of quiet pain, and she died with it still locked inside her, believing she was protecting us. And in a way she was, but the truth, I've learned, has a way of finding its way out eventually. It demands to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be understood, no matter how painful. Last month, I finally made the pilgrimage. I went to Virginia. I stood outside the old Whitmore plantation house, which, in a cruel twist of irony, is now a charming bed and breakfast. The website, with its glossy photos and romantic descriptions, talks about the historic charm and antebellum elegance. It paints a picture of a bygone era of grace and gentility. There's no mention, of course, of the 127 human beings who were enslaved there. No mention of Charlotte, my fourth great-grandmother, or her children, or the unspeakable indignities they suffered. No mention of the mixed-race babies who were born into slavery, fathered by the master, and who died as free people, carrying his name. Their stories erased from the official narrative. It was a whitewashed history, literally and figuratively. A deliberate act of forgetting that felt like another layer of violence. I stood there for a long, long time, looking at that house, its stately columns, its manicured lawns, its facade of southern charm. Part of me, a small primal part, wanted to burn it down, to torch that symbol of oppression and call it justice. Another part of me wanted to go inside, to walk through those rooms and scream at the walls, to howl the names of the forgotten, to demand that the house acknowledge the suffering that built its very foundations. But mostly I just felt this overwhelming, suffocating sadness. A profound grief for all the lives lost, all the stories untold, all the pain unacknowledged. Because in a way, Thomas Whitmore won. His DNA survived. His descendants are walking around today, some carrying his name with pride, others, like me, carrying it like a scar, a constant aching reminder of a past that refuses to stay buried. His legacy, however complicated and horrific, lives on. The thing about DNA tests is they don't just show you who you are in the present moment. They show you how you came to be. They unveil the intricate, often brutal tapestry of your past. And sometimes that story is so much worse, so much more complicated and heart-wrenching than you ever imagined.
But it's also the truth. And there's something profoundly powerful, something deeply liberating about finally knowing the truth. Even when it breaks your heart into 1,000 pieces, it's the first step towards healing, towards understanding, towards reclaiming a narrative that was stolen, distorted, and buried. It's about giving voice to the silenced and honoring the resilience of those who endured. Before you go, I want to ask you something, because I know I'm not alone in this. If you've done a DNA test and found something unexpected, something that challenged everything you thought you knew about your family, your identity, your history.
Well, how did you handle it? Did you embrace the truth, however painful? Or did you perhaps try to bury it again, to return to the comfort of the unknown? Let me know in the comments below, because I truly believe we need to talk about these stories more. We need to break these generational silences. We need to stop letting the past and its architects win by keeping us ignorant. If this story resonated with you, if it moved you, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. Not for me, but for everyone who's carrying these hidden histories, these whispered truths. The more we talk about these truths, the more we bring them into the light, the less power they have over us, the less they can fester in the darkness. And if you're thinking about taking a DNA test, just know that you might discover things you weren't prepared to learn, but you might also, in the process, discover yourself in a way you never thought possible. This isn't just my story. It's the story of thousands of black families across America who are discovering that the line between slave and master wasn't just blurred, it was crossed in the most intimate, violent, and enduring way possible. We're all, in our own ways, learning to live with the knowledge that we exist because of both the incredible resilience of our enslaved ancestors and the unspeakable actions of their perpetrators. And somehow, in this complex, painful, yet ultimately powerful journey, we have to find a way to honor both truths, to honor the pain, to honor the survival, and to honor the undeniable, complicated legacy that defines us.